This is 91.3 FM, WCW in Worcester, Massachusetts, the Dr. Chris Radio of Horror program. And tonight on Radio of Horror, we have author Adam Rockoff, the author of The Horror of It All and Going to Pieces, the rise and fall of the slasher film, as well as the writer of the remake of I Spit on Your Grave. Thank you for coming on the show with us, Adam.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Again, I haven't read your book, as we were discussing off the air a little bit about your first book, the slasher genre, but I saw the movie, and I saw it back-to-back when I was sick with Rocky Balboa. It was kind of it was actually, I remember it was also St. Patrick's Day.
Well, I think that's I think that might be apropos, because obviously the slasher film, you know that most of the famous films were set on certain dates, whether they be Halloween or birthdays or prom nights. But now that we're talking about it, I think St. Patrick's Day might be the only one never to have a horror movie, especially a slasher film, set on it. So, we might be making history right here.
Well, yeah, I guess a lot of people would find Leprechaun to be too insulting.
That's true.
And there's no Jewish horror movie. There's no Hanukkah horror movie.
You know what? Being a secular Jew myself, I think I might have to remedy the situation. There's so many great Christmas horror films. I think we do need a Hanukkah horror. Who kills people with latkes or menorahs or something like that?
Can you imagine a killer rabbi going around with a dreidel and he spins it into people and kills them?
I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think you should become my agent and we should go around Hollywood thinking about it.
There's plenty of Jewish people in Hollywood. I'm sure they'll just jump at the chance of making Hanukkah the horror movie.
Honestly, from your lips to God's ears, it might literally be in the pipeline right now, and the joke's going to be on us when I read about it in Variety in a couple of weeks or months.
I joke about this every year at Hanukkah time because there is no horror Hanukkah thing other than unless you count the Golem, which is the only Jewish monster that you can really think of. And by the way, this is all in good taste, and we're not making fun of anything, so I don't want any phone calls or emails or bad comments. Okay, we're just pointing out there is no.
Jewish. I can say anything I want about their religion.
Okay, you know what's funny? Listen, you know what's funny? I just got done watching Green Inferno, and in it, there's a Jewish punk chick that says something very anti-Semitic and very sexist against women, and the woman turns around and looks at her, and she's just like, "What? I'm freaking Jewish," and she pulls up the Star of David or whatever. I'm allowed to say that.
Right. I mean, you remember, obviously, that's Eli Roth who did it. I mean, if you ever saw his first film, Cabin Fever, there's, I don't want to say it's a great scene, but it's, pretty shocking because we're so accustomed nowadays, nobody would ever, think to say the N-word, certainly not, out of anger or something, maybe, in a joke. But if you remember that sort of the old white trash guy is calling these black guys, the N-word. And then when he's finally approached by them at the end, and he goes up to them and he's like, "Oh, here they are, my N-word," and you realize they're good friends, and it was completely in a different context. It was just, I think that's one way that Eli likes to play around with the audience's expectations. So I'm not surprised to hear that about the Jewish character of the film, quite honestly.
Oh, don't forget, Eli Roth was also in Inglourious Bastards.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was one of the Jews.
Jew.
Yeah, he was the. He didn't have any lines in the movie whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right.
Is he Jewish?
I assume from his last name. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't bet my life on it, but I would say chances are he is.
We should have actually had this entire interview done around Hanukkah. It made a lot more sense considering. Actually, no, it's a Jewish holiday this weekend, isn't it?
It's what this weekend?
It's a Jewish holiday this weekend.
It was actually, it was two Jewish holidays. It was the Jewish New Year and then Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. And this is a perfect segue to talk about my book. Because I make the joke that, but it wasn't really a joke. I grew up in a predominantly Catholic town, mostly Italians. And, when you're different, when you're an outsider, you wish you fit in with everybody. And I said the one thing that I never was envious about my non-Jewish friends was where I only had to, once a year, apologize and say I'm sorry for things. They had to go to confession every single week and spill their guts and their most embarrassing secrets to the priest. So I was thankful that we didn't have to do that in Reformed Judaism.
Okay, no joke. For anyone listening to this on YouTube, as this is going to be put on YouTube after the interview airs on WCUW 91.3 FM, as of the time this is being recorded, On the air right now at WCUW here in downtown Worcester, Massachusetts, is Shareem, the Jewish show by my pal Mitch Gordon.
Perfect.
We have the Jewish show going on right now at 9:19 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right in the broadcasting studio. I'm in the recording studio of WCUW, and Mitch is in the broadcasting studio doing Shareem as we speak.
Honestly, I have never talked this much about religion, I would say, in the past. Since I was bar mitzvahed, 20-something odd years ago.
All right, let's get off all this religious mumbo-jumbo crap before someone anti-Semitic bombs my show with a whole bunch of, bad stuff or whatever. That guy supports Judaism. Oh, we can't listen to his show anymore. Oh, boy. I probably pissed off Mel Gibson already or something. I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, before I say anything else that'll get me in trouble. Okay, so your book, The Horror of It All, is a chronicle of your love affair with the horror industry starting when?
I was going to say really from birth, but I guess, I didn't really love it at birth. But, as from as long as I can remember, always scary movies appealed to me. And I talk about this extensively in the book, that the most scariest film I had ever seen, and I saw it, I'm guessing when I was probably 6 years old, was Disney's Watcher in the Woods. And everybody, when I tell people that, everybody thinks I'm trying to be cute or
oh my God, I love that movie. I just got done talking about the last guest I had in the studio doing a live recording about that movie.
And it's scary, right? You agree or not?
Yes. I swear to God, Adam, the guest we had in the studio before we're recording your interview right now, again, anyone listening to us on YouTube right now, this is in the past, the guest that we just had in for this upcoming event in Boston, a Gothic formal, they had never heard of the movie before. I went into great detail about how I think it's one of the scariest movies ever made.
It is. I mean, I've said this in other interviews, it is one of the few movies that even today I have trouble watching by myself with the lights off. I mean, that imagery of, Karen Aylwood in the broken mirror, with the blindfold on, stretching out, saying, help me, it's absolutely terrifying.
Yes!
So to answer your question, my interest in horror movies started way back then. That was the first one that really scared the you-know-what out of me. And then because I grew up in, the late 70s, early 80s, this was the time of the independent video store and cable TV. So I was exposed to all these movies, not in a theater, although when I got old enough, obviously I went to see horror movies as much as I could. But, both on cable and renting them at home, like most people of my generation did.
Wow, yeah, I mean, it's amazing you bring that up. What's funny is that, I was just at the video store, not the video store, those don't exist anymore, excuse me. I was just at a corporate big thing that sells movies. I'm not going to give away the name because I don't pay for advertising on my show. They had the Witch movie starring Sarah Jessica Parker, who looks really hot in it. What's it called?
The Witch movie?
The Witch movie, W-I-T-C-H, that Disney did with Sarah Jessica Parker. She looks super hot.
No, all I can think of where she looks super hot is, I Know You Did Last Summer.
Hocus Pocus. Adam, Hocus Pocus.
Hocus Pocus. All right, no.
It stars, it's about 3 witches that are resurrected in the present day by a virgin male. It's a big plot line throughout the movie that, it's a virgin, oh my God, a virgin. And
I missed that one.
There's a talking cat in it, who was once a human, and, Doug Jones plays a zombie in it.
Okay. And no, it's not even ringing a bell now that you're describing it.
It's a Disney kind of horror comedy family film.
Okay, all right. Well, look, my kids are old enough where they're not really getting into horror movies. I would like them to get into horror movies, but if it's age appropriate for them, maybe I'll check it out soon.
My kid wants to see Hotel Transylvania 2, and he's a big Godzilla fan, and he's a big fan of Jurassic World, so I'll take it where it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are great gateways into horror. I mean, and some of them, have really horrific scenes in them, without a doubt.
Oh, there's another great Disney horror movie that I don't know if it's mentioned in your book called Mr. Boogedy. It actually stars a very young Kristen Swanson years before she was Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Really? Really? No, you know, I mean, but my horror cred now is becoming less impressive because you're naming these films that I never even heard of. Yeah, I never saw that one. What I thought you were going to say, and whenever we talk about Disney horror films and I say Watcher in the Woods, everybody says, oh, I thought you were going to say something Wicked This Way Comes, which was another great one. I haven't seen it in years and years, but, you know, for people of my generation, that's another one that always, you know, freaked them out when they were kids.
What about Night on Bald Mountain?
Night on Bald Mountain. No, I don't even remember that one.
It's in Fantasia.
Oh, yeah, okay. You know, the classical piece. Yeah, okay.
Yes, it's a short film. Sorry, I apologize. It's a short film.
Yes, it's a short film, and I do like the composition. I thought it was a feature film. No, and Fantasia was creepy enough.
No, but Disney wants to make Night on Bald Mountain an actual movie.
Really? Okay.
Yes. And do you know who did all the movements and the character work for the demon Balthazar in the short film?
No, but tell me, because I'm embarrassed now. I'm probably not even going to know who this person is, so tell me.
Bela Lugosi.
No way, really?
Bela Lugosi he did all of the character human movements for the demon in Night on Bald Mountain.
Really? That's because what year was Fantasia?
Oh my God, the 1950s or the 1940s. I'm probably wrong, and someone can leave a comment in the YouTube comments about it. I'm probably wrong.
So Bella was in his sort of. He was certainly on the downside of his career. This was like Ed Wood time when he did it.
This was just before Ed Wood, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I got to go back and watch it again. Yeah. That movie bored me, but I mean, obviously, it's a classic to say the least.
Fantasia was 1940.
1940. Okay. All right. So it wasn't really Ed Wood time yet, but it was still obviously post Dracula.
Yes, he was. It was definitely at least that would be 7 years after Dracula. No, Dracula came out.
31.
Yeah, so 9 years after Dracula. So he's getting to that point where his career is not helping his other things going on in his life.
Right. Yeah, too bad he didn't live a lot longer. He could do with animated films as they are today. He would have been well paid for voiceover work. I'll tell you that.
Well, he didn't do any voiceover work, of course, in the Fantasia short because it's obviously all music. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. No, I mean, all these A-list actors now.
Oh yeah.
Work for the animated film.
Look at his successor to Dracula, Christopher Lee. How many voiceover parts did he get through the rest of his life?
You're right. In fact, I was just reading one of his many obituaries and articles about his legacy. And I actually, I'm a huge fan of Christopher Lee, but I'm obviously a much bigger fan of his, Hammer work. I really wasn't up on all the stuff he did recently, like with the Lord of the Rings and all that kind of stuff. So I was shocked to hear how much he was actually working still, and how much amazing stuff he really did.
Unfortunately, unlike Lugosi, Karloff, of course, obviously had a good voice acting career, with his most famous thing of being the voice of the Grinch in Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay, go back. Let's get back to your book. I mean, we're obviously sticking to the horror genre, and we can go on a tangent about it. But what is the main focus of your book, and what are you hoping people will take from your book when they pick it up?
Well, here's the story, the genesis behind it. After Going to Pieces, I wrote that it came out in 2002, and I wrote it in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it had been a long time since I wrote a book, and I wanted to write another one. But the thing is, it's not as if I am one of these professional authors who turns out a book a year. I'm not that bright. I only have a certain amount of knowledge of specific things, and horror movies is one of them. So I knew it had to be about horror movies. But the problem was, most of the things that I love about the genre, Italian horror directors, Friday the 13th, a bunch of other things, the definitive book on those subjects had already been written. And in most cases, they were written, a lot better than what I could have done. So I said to myself, geez, what can I do? And then I realized the only thing that nobody else could do is tell the story of the evolution of the horror film as it sort of dovetailed with my life and my evolution. So it became, half personal memoir, half I guess you could say, critical analysis of these films. And what I really hope with the book, and to some degree, I've succeeded very well, and in other ways, a lot of people seem to get very angry when they read it. I wanted people to read it and to sort of remember their own childhood, and remember, those great days when, you would ride your bike to the local video store and spend hours gazing at the shelves thinking about what you were going to rent, and, stay up till 1, 2 in the morning when your parents were asleep to record, Terror Train on cable TV. I wanted it to be, a walk down memory lane for fans of my generation.
What are your 3 favorite parts of the book you want people to pay attention to?
That's actually an excellent question, and I have the book here, so I'm going to look at it quickly. It's funny. My favorite chapter is the one that, in most of the reviews about the book, people seem to like the least, and that is the chapter on heavy metal, and how heavy metal and horror films have been, linked together since the early days. And the reason people seem to be very angry with it is because it just tangentially talks about horror films, and mostly it talks about the PMRC hearings in Congress. But to me, and to most kids growing up at that time who were into that kind of stuff, the two things, really went hand in hand. And that's what I was trying to remind people of, about how this attack on heavy metal and lyrics in heavy metal songs was really, part and parcel with a lot of the attacks on slasher films, most famously, the Siskel and Ebert sneak previews episode, where they really just, belittled and insulted slasher films and anybody who enjoyed watching them.
Real quick, by the way, there's a documentary that you can go fund on Indiegogo about metal, and it's called The History of Metal and Horror. It's on Indiegogo right now.
I'm not getting, as soon as we hang up the phone, I'm getting something to eat, but after that, I'm going to check it out, because I would absolutely love to see it.
Yeah, it's. I'm gonna fund it. I was supposed to have the guys on the show with me tonight, but we had to postpone the interview a little bit, and I can't wait to talk to them about their documentary, because I think it's really great. I saw clips of it. They still have tons of interviews they got to do. They have some ones nailed down right now, but it looks really cool. And of course, speaking of metal and horror, Hollywood Vampires just put out a CD, a compilation of all of their stuff that they worked on. I mean, the 3 biggest members of that band were Joe Perry, Alice Cooper, and Johnny Depp, who all have ties to the horror and metal industry. And there's an opening poem at the beginning of the CD by Christopher Lee.
That's awesome. And I mean, for me, this is also sort of going off on a tangent, but Iron Maiden has always been my favorite band. They were my favorite band as a kid, and today, and I say this in the book, they're the one band that no matter what, I will still buy every one of their records. And they just came out with their first double album, so I'm not going to say it rivals the quality of their early years, but it's unbelievable that they're still making music after all these years.
That is cool.
Yeah, very cool.
And, of course, you were also the writer of the remake of I Spit It on Your Grave. How did that come about?
It's one of these stories that, people hear, and it makes them realize that they can get just as lucky. I mean, at the time, I didn't have an agent. I was just sort of a wannabe writer who had written a few scripts. Because I live in Chicago, it's not as if I'm in Hollywood all the time meeting people. So I read in Variety that that they were going to remake it, and I literally just wrote, it wasn't even a call or an email, it was literally a letter. I wrote a letter to the producers, Citadel, the company who made it, and I said, listen, I said, I know this is a long shot, but, I'm a writer. I know about horror films. I love the original. Let me send you a writing sample and see what you think. So they were nice enough to say yes. I was, quite frankly, shocked, but they indulged me. They read it. They passed it on to Mayor Zarchi, who wrote and directed the original, who was an executive producer. He loved the writing sample, and we made the deal, right away. I mean, it's one of, you always hear horror stories, no pun intended, about, young writers being taken advantage of and how awful Hollywood is. But the whole process of working with the guys at Citadel and the director of the film, Steve Monroe, I mean, it couldn't have gone smoother. It was collaborative. It was friendly. It was really one of the best creative experiences in my life.
Why remake something so vile as a rape movie?
It's an excellent question, and it's one I really struggled with. There were a few times where I said to myself, do I really want to do this? And and I'll be honest, the reason I eventually took the plunge and did it was twofold. One, I needed the money. There's no shame in saying that. I had a young family, and this was an opportunity, and obviously it wasn't a ton of money, but it was enough where, I felt fine saying, okay, this is a gig, and I'm going to take it. And the second one really was just, I was talking to a director friend of mine, Jeremy Caston, who's done a ton of horror films, and I was telling him, I was saying, I don't know if I should take the job, and he sort of, through the phone shook me and said, get off your high horse, what's wrong with you? So many writers, even well-known writers, would kill to get this gig and remake the most infamous exploitation film of all time. Don't be so precious. Just do it and let the chips fall as they may. I took his advice and I did it. And, the subject matter, is obviously as distasteful as anything. I mean, quite frankly, I find rape and rape stories, much more upsetting than even murder. So I think the trick was you have to treat it in a way where you couldn't even make an argument that in some way the attack was justified or that she led them on in any way. And you also had to make sure that the action the rape was so horrific that her revenge is more than justified. I mean, that's something I actually get a little bit angry with when people comment on the movie, because a lot of people read it, and in their reading of it, they say, well, Jennifer, the girl, she turns to be just as bad as the people who abuse her. And I'm thinking, not in my eyes. In my eyes, she's a hero. In my eyes, these men got what was coming to them tenfold, and they more than deserved it.
What were you hoping people were going to take away from this movie that they didn't quite get about the original and are pretty pissed off about? Because, this movie is pretty much like the most anti-feminist film ever. I mean, feminists hate this movie. They attack it. I mean, women absolutely either don't get the message, and some women do. Some women find it empowering, despite the, getting there. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff this movie crosses that, and I can't believe they're making a third one, and they're making a sequel to Camilla's, too.
No, they are making a third one. I was actually involved in the second one originally, and then we both actually decided to go in a different direction. The way they did it was more sort of hostile-based, and I actually really liked the film. I like what they did with it, and my idea was to do sort of more of the Most Dangerous Game, where the women are being killed as sport and they escape. But to answer your question about what I hope people, I don't know what I hope they get out of it, but I think the way people look at the film today has changed a little bit. I mean, originally when the film came out, very, very few people saw it as a feminist movie. They saw it as, anti-feminism, a woman alone, independent, getting what she deserved. And it was an awful message. And the message to me always was, as I said before, these men who did the most horrible thing you could possibly do to a woman got their comeuppance, got, exactly what they deserved. And I think that when you read some people still hate the film. Some people still hate the original film. A lot of people, more people, hate the remake that I wrote. But I think you're finding more and more people who really appreciate it as sort of a fable, really, a dark fairy, a revenge fairy tale. Not unlike we were talking about it before. When we were talking about Eli Roth and Inglourious Basterds, a revision of history where the Nazis get what's coming to them. So. That's, I guess, what I hope people think about it or take away.
I didn't have the worst reaction to the movie. I mean, I kind of watched it because I do this show, but I was asking myself, like, what the F? Why remake this? I don't understand. Right. You know what I mean? And it's the same thing with Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters has been remade. It's been filmed, it's been completed, and I say, God damn, Sony, what the hell?
I would say the main difference is, and I hear this a lot when people complain about remakes, Ghostbusters was a bona fide classic. I mean, a classic of the comedy/horror genre. Everybody loved Ghostbusters. I Spit on Your Grave was, universally detested by everybody. So on one hand, you could say, well, then there's really no reason to remake it. But on the other hand, you know, you could say, well, this wasn't a good movie to begin with, so let's see what we can do a little bit differently to improve upon it and make it more interesting.
Your other book, which was made into a great Stars documentary, I love how the documentary is done the entire time. I love the music. There's this one guy in the documentary. He looks like he's walking in an alley, and the music they're playing behind him in the documentary is just so very kind of creepy. But it is a really cool documentary, and it actually was, I think, the first film documentary that I ever bought. I have now acquired a whole bunch of them. I mean, horror documentaries are huge with horror fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can, now that I'm on the spot, I can't name any of them, but you know, I watch them all the time, and it seems like one is better than the next. You know, as a rule, horror documentaries are done with so much care and so much dedication that they're amazing. I mean, you have the ones like His Name Was Jason and Never Sleep Again, which, you know, you can't possibly do a more comprehensive look at the Nightmare on Elm Street and the Friday the 13th series. But then you have, you know, great ones from the Australian director Mark Hartley, who did documentaries on Ozploitation, Australian exploitation films, and then Filipino exploitation films. And his films are some of the best documentaries, not just about horror films that I've ever seen, but best documentaries I've ever seen, period. They're that good.
How many different slasher films do you cover in your book?
Yeah, I would say all of them, but then, you know, people will call me and say, you didn't cover Madman, you didn't cover, you know, The Final Terror. I did, I guess, as many as I could. I mean, a couple hundred, but instead of just a laundry list of all of them, I really went into detail about, you know, the most famous ones, the ones people wanted to hear about. Because I said to myself, listen, you know, should I? Because I had a word limit or a page limit. You know, do I want to write one page just rehashing the summary of, you know, something no, like two people have ever seen, or do I want to really go into depth about Prom Night, about Terror Train, about My Bloody Valentine, Happy Birthday to Me? Because up until the time that I wrote the book, and I want to sound like I'm patting myself on the back, but there hadn't been really anything. There'd been some critical analyses of the slasher film, but there hadn't been a whole history of it. And I told the stories that I thought, or that I knew, I would have wanted to hear if I picked up the book myself. You know, the behind-the-scenes stuff, how these films came together, what it was like on set, what the release was like, what the response was like. So, you know, that was what I tried to do in writing that book.
Of course, we just recently lost the maestro of horror, Wes Craven, who's featured prominently in your documentary.
Sorry, say the last part again?
We lost Wes Craven recently, who, of course...
Yeah, and it was, you know, I have to say, for somebody who's sort of in the horror community and in the know, I had heard rumors that he was sick, but I certainly didn't realize how sick. And, you know, it's just, it's an awful, awful loss. I mean, everybody who you talk to who knew Wes well, I didn't know him well at all, said, you know, what a nice and generous guy he really was. And, you know, forgetting about him as a person for a second, just looking to his contribution to the horror film, I mean, he did a handful of films that will really, at least I think, stand the test of time and will be forever just watched and watched again as classics of the genre, starting with, you know, Last House on the Left, which really sort of defined the exploitation grindhouse film at the time, and then Nightmare on Elm Street, which, you know, one of my favorite all-time movies, and then most recently with Scream, reinventing a more urban genre and really making it viable, making it what it is today. Because until Scream came along, you know, I don't know if you remember this, in the late 80s and early 90s, you know, there was nothing anything. I mean, horror films were like, you know, Dr. Giggles and stuff like that. It was as barren a time as I have ever seen for horror films. And then Scream just jump-started this whole new trend, and it's 20 years old now. And we've seen, you know, a million different subgenres of the horror film. And although they don't have anything, most of them have nothing to do with Scream, if it wasn't for Scream sort of revitalizing the genre and making it viable, the producers, you know, we wouldn't have 95% of the horror films that are coming out today. So I think we all owe Wes, as fans, a huge, huge debt of gratitude.
Some of the quotes on the back of your book say that Adrienne King calls you the ultimate authority of horror films and fandom. We've had Adrienne King on the show. She's a great person. We shared a stalker story between us, and so that must be a really nice quote, considering how big in the horror industry she is amongst the fans.
She is, and I can name, I hope, well, I don't know if she would be listening to this, but if she is, I will embarrass her, but one of because she's become sort of a close friend of mine, and one of the most sort of surreal experiences of my life was she was speaking at a horror film festival, and I was moderating a panel on Friday the 13th people with, you know, the great Betsy Palmer and Harry Manfredi and other people involved, and when she was finished, instead of going back to her hotel room or meeting fans, she said to me, I'd like to watch the movie again. So I sat in the back of the theater with her, just the two of us, next to each other, watching Friday the 13th. And if you would have ever told, you know, the 7 or 8-year-old me that I would be sitting in a theater watching Friday the 13th with Adrienne King, you know, never in a million years would I would have believed something as cool as that. But, you know, she's just, you know, for whatever reason, she never had the career that, you know, I think she should have. She was fantastic in Friday the 13th. She's a tremendous actress, and she's just a wonderful lady.
What's your next project that you're working on now that The Horror of It All is out and published?
Yeah, it just came out, so I haven't had that much time. But, you know, besides scripts, which I'm always writing and trying to get off the ground, I started on my first novel, which is something I wanted to do for a long time. A serial killer story. I don't want to say too much about it, and most people probably wouldn't care about it anyway if I talked about it. But I'm dabbling in that, but, you know, always wanting to go back to writing screenplays if the right situation presents itself. As far as nonfiction works about horror films, I don't want to say I'll never do it again, but, you know, in some ways it's kind of depressing because, you know, everything that I would have loved to write about, again, has already been written by people who are, you know, smarter and better writers than myself. So it's not as if I can go back and say, oh my God, you know, I love Dario Argento, I love his films, which is true, I do. But, you know, the definitive work on Dario Argento has been written. It's been written a bunch of times, actually. So in terms of nonfiction horror, you know, this might be it for me.
Are you going on tour with your book?
You know, I did some appearances locally when the book came out. They were pretty badly attended. There were only a handful of people there, and I thank those people. I'm grateful that they came out and we talked about horror films for a while. But yeah, I don't think I'm doing any more publicity tours. I've done a ton of interviews, which is great because I could talk about horror films forever. And you know, I just hope the people who listen, you know, get something out of it. And just like my book, I hope it makes them think and even remember the films of their youth and the films that they grew up with.
Adam, do you have a website fans can go to pick up copies of your book or anything else that you happen to be attached to?
You know, I'm embarrassed to say I don't want to say I'm anti-social media, but I don't have a Facebook page. I don't have a Twitter. I get my vision and my thoughts out in actual books. But, you know, it's easy to get a copy of the book if you wanted it in every Barnes & Noble, and you can get it on Amazon and all sorts of, you know, internet sites.
Cool, Adam. Well, hey, man, thank you so much for coming on the show with us to talk a little bit about The Horror of It All, the I Spit on Your Grave remake, and the rise of the slasher genre, which we're a super big fan of. The Horror of It All, you can pick up at your local bookstore anywhere, and we look forward to your next adventure in the horror industry, Adam.
I appreciate that, Chris. It was a blast. Thanks for having me.